friends, we're here to talk about A.S. Byatt's novel, The Children's Book, chapters 16 through 30. So it's really the middle third of the novel, pretty much. I guess we're sort of in a place where we have a lot of stuff going on and we're really not sure what it all adds up to yet.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's a little bit like that sort of mid-plot point where there are a lot of issues getting put out on the table and we don't really know where they're going to go, and even sometimes the writing seems a little bit indulgent, or I'm wondering sort of why is she going on for a while about this.
Yeah.
But it's A.S. Byatt, so I'm willing to trust her and to think that this doesn't fit in right now, but there's some way she's going to bring it around.
Well, I wouldn't say there's anything that doesn't fit together, but that long passage about Paris that takes place in Paris. They go to the Paris exposition. I don't know. I was getting kind of sort of turned around in the history of art and the history of Paris. I just wasn't really sure why that all had to be in there. It didn't feel like the plot really moved forward very much in Paris. You likened it to reading a guidebook.
Right, but it's like a guidebook to the weird. I mean, there's so much strange stuff going on in Paris, and there's so much stuff that's so forward-looking, like all the electricity and the electrification of the whole place. But there's also sort of the corruption and decay of the city and the some of the people who live there and the artists who have hit their peak or not.
I don't know about corruption and decay. I mean, I think the art that's happening, that's being made, the literature and the theater and so forth is very avant-garde. It's very, sophisticated, and maybe we're supposed to be seeing these characters as outside of that kind of artistic sophistication. I don't really know. I mean, the novel is definitely very much about art. And one thing I love about it is that Byatt is not reverent about art. She's showing us these characters who are artists and kind of peeling away all these layers of hypocrisy. So they'll say they're like Stern's wife, for example, right? He says, "Oh, my wife is an artist, but I'm not sure how she's going to react when she finds out I have an illegitimate daughter. And when I bring you home, Dorothy, let's see what happens. I can't make any promises." So Byatt is really good at questioning things that I think in literature, because it's self-referential, she's writing about literature partly. And I think she's really good at exposing those hypocrisies that usually don't get exposed.
Well, and a similar one that I thought was really surprising was Olive says, "I'm not an artist, I'm a storyteller." Maybe that's sort of the one part of Olive's life that's really true, right? Because there's so much of her life that is not the way it seems, or she's deceiving people about it. But in that one, she's basically saying, like, I do this to tell stories and to make money, and it's a business. I'm not a highfalutin, artist doing it for reasons of theory. It's really a practical thing for
and
me.
it has to be practical because she comes from a mining family. Her social position is very precarious. She wasn't born into it, and she doesn't feel secure in it. There's this whole thematic element about art and reality. There's this great line about Olive's writing. It says, "Olive had written the world of Toad Fright." Like literally, she had written the world of Toad Fright and their happy family. And then the quote is, "with the inventive power with which she told her story." So in a sense, she is seen as having written this happy, so-called happy life that they have at Toad Fright, where everything's just a little bit rough around the edges, but the children are rough and tumble out in the forest, and there are friends coming over for dinner, and everything seems really lovely. And of course it's not below the surface, but she's kind of written the story of that happy family. It makes me think about, people do that all the time. Like if you think about social media, people are curating and crafting this story about who they are and kind of presenting it to the rest of the world. And that's essentially what Olive is doing in a 19th century way. Then there's that sense that maybe that storytelling is more real. I think that's what you were kind of getting at a moment ago than the reality is. Because the reality is kind of tamped down, not talked about, and in a way that makes it less real.
Well, I think she's closest to Thomas. And the story that she writes about Thomas and his shadow, and
Her son Tom.
sorry, Tom.
Yeah.
And him having lost his shadow. And I think that that's a
Like
really...
Peter Pan.
Right, but I think it applies really well to him too, because he is so comfortable in the woods, but he's being forced into society. And there's that split in him. And when he goes off to Eton, it just doesn't work for him. His character isn't whole yet, or is taken apart by that process. I think that's what she's writing about with the rats pulling the shadow away.
Yeah. It's a terrible little story.
Right. Well, and that's just it. It's really violent and terrifying. So in a way, like the writing allows her to deal with that terrible reality.
I don't think that Byatt is saying that the stories are any kind of antidote for reality. I think that she's just pointing out there's a tension here between the two things, and there's a lot of like movement across this blurred line between art and life. I found that in this section of this third of the book, I kept writing down quotes about that. I mean, Seraphita is described at one point as if she were a painting, so it's like, is she real? Is she not real? There's a passage about the secret society that Julian is interested in. Their slogan is reality. Everything else was merely phenomenal. Again, it's like kind of an interesting thing for a writer to do, because you don't usually see writers undermining the premise of art itself. It's usually elevated. And she's not elevating it, I don't think. I think she's questioning. It's almost as if the things that look like art are corrupt in some way.
Well, you're making me think about Flood's pottery, his secret cabinet.
Oh, yeah, right.
Which is the ultimate corrupt art. And we don't even know how that's going to come around. But
We don't know what the circumstances are.
But it does help explain the blandness and the affectlessness of his children.
Right. So this is a book full of secrets, some of which we know now. Like we know that Violet is the mother of some of these children. I wasn't surprised by that. You said you were.
Yeah.
But I felt like it was set up for me, because there were comments about Violet sort of telling the children, oh, well, I'm essentially your mother anyway. I'm the one who takes care of you. I don't know. There were like a number of little hints dropped about that along the way. So that wasn't really that surprising, I didn't think.
A friend of mine who's in this group with us said that he has enjoyed just sitting down with the book and just checking in with the characters. And one of the things that made me think about is Stephen King saying that ultimately the only thing that matters is it an entertaining story, right? You can do everything sort of wrong, but if it doesn't please, it's pointless. A lot of those digressive sections, like in Paris, they're really pleasing. They're really fun, even if they seem inconsequential. And so I think a lot of the time when I'm listening or reading, I'm kind of enjoying the ride. So when something like the revelation of Violet sneaks up on me, that's okay.
Oh, interesting. I found the Paris section a little bit tedious. But I'm not sure whether it was actually tedious or whether it was because I happened to be reading that section in little bits at bedtime rather than sitting down and like devoting an hour to just reading. So I didn't find the Paris section entertaining.
The other thing that I thought about is right about the same time as the Paris section, Elsie is at home back in England going to these lecture series. There's something about them that on the one hand seems kind of homespun, but on the other hand, there's kind of a sincerity and lack of sort of like stage lighting that I think is a really nice contrast to Paris.
Yes, right, because that happens, I think, right after the Paris section. It's definitely set up in contrast to it. But, I mean, she ends up pregnant. We're not literally told that it's Herbert Methley's child, but we're certainly led to believe that. And so that undermines that whole experience.
Okay, but what I thought was really interesting about that experience is it's the women from that lecture series that come and actually help her out.
Because he, corrals them and gets them to help her.
Right.
And they're feeling a little bit self-righteous about it. I mean, she's like, ugh, okay, I guess I have to accept their help because they're right, they'll figure it out. But she's not happy about it.
But they actually do something. Whereas the energy of Paris is very kind of like self-indulgent, and you've got like Oscar Wilde showing up. Is he the one who's got like teeth falling out and he's just all like smelly?
I think he's dead by the end of that section.
Is he? Okay.
Yeah, I
mean,
think
he's
so.
in bad shape. That whole idea in Paris of sort of living large and liberal doesn't go anywhere good.
Right.
But for Elsie, it actually helps her.
I don't know. I don't think she's really excited about having a baby.
But I feel like she's being supported.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know that those two things were juxtaposed because we're supposed to see city bad, country good.
No, I just think that it's kind of surprising, right? Because Paris is supposed to be sort of sophistication and forward thinking. It's all, about the future and things like that. And then like in this little home frontier town, there are actually people helping each other out and actually doing right.
That's so interesting because I read that quite differently. I didn't think that either one of those places or situations was being held up as the ideal or something positive. I don't know that Byatt is offering us a redemptive option. Except to say that the one thing about this novel that's so great.
I know where you're going. The children.
Yeah, the kids are so insightful and smart and
brave.
And they're like, these adults are a mess. But they're not in charge, so they don't have control over their situation. She's just so good at writing kids on the brink of adulthood and doing so sympathetically. And when you think about the connection to fairy tales, that's often who the fairy tale centers around too, is a child on the verge of adulthood. I can see why there's a fairy tale element wrapped in here. It's not that all of the points of view come from the kids, but a lot of what we get is in the voices of the kids. And then we also are at a point, maybe about halfway through the book, where Queen Victoria dies.
Yes.
And the Edwardian period begins. And it was almost like, even as I was reading that passage, maybe because I was halfway through the book, I thought, oh, there's a seismic shift happening here.
Edward brought delight, but also frivolity. There's this sense of relief, and we don't have to be so uptight now, but then things get trivialized. Irresponsibility sort of comes in a different way.
And we know, historically, what we're headed for, which is World War I. But I think that maybe my overarching feeling right now, 2/3 of the way through, is I'm not really sure what this is all about, which is funny because we've just had a whole conversation about art and literature and, future looking and coming of age, but I feel like I'm really not sure. I mean, it's such a huge cast of characters that she's managing. So part of my fascination, I guess, is like how she's doing that. And she seems to be doing it pretty skillfully, but I also feel like there are so many balls in the air. I just really don't know where we're going or what's holding this all together.
Right,
I mean,
and how the plot lines are going to align.
Or are they going to align? I mean, who says they're going to?
Yeah, maybe I'm asking it to do things that it doesn't want to do.
I mean, I don't know. I don't even know what my expectations are. I did have one expectation from having read Possession, which was that I thought we were going to get more of Olive's fairy tales. And we've gotten 2 or 3 of them. But I thought that we were going to have more of them and that those were going to kind of hold the story together. And in fact, I mean, at one point, Byatt writes that Olive's stories are what holds the family together. Not just that she's telling the story of their happy family, but also that she's literally making money with her writing that holds the family together. So I did have an expectation that we were going to see more of those stories and that those stories were going to hold the novel together. But that doesn't quite seem to be playing out.
No, in fact, who is it who said that she didn't like being cast as a hedgehog?
Oh yeah, Dorothy.
Right? So there's a story that maybe is trying to hold things together, and maybe it works for Olive, but it doesn't work for Dorothy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that bottom line, one thing we know about Olive is that she's really selfish. She says she's writing these stories for her children, but you get the sense that she really is writing them for herself.
And is that bad?
Well, I mean, it just is how it is to be a writer, I think. She's creating and controlling the stories, and so the kids, on one level, I think they enjoy that she does that for them, but I think they also, the older they get, the more control they would prefer to have over their own stories, so to speak. What are your thoughts for the last third of the book? What are your expectations or hopes for the last third of the book?
I'm going to continue to enjoy the ride. One of the things that we touched on, I think, in the first video is just the beautiful writing.
Yeah.
And there are passages that you could excise parts of them perhaps, but they're just beautiful, and maybe that's enough. And so I'm going to continue to enjoy those. I feel that Tom is going to be a lead character. He's going to be central to how things resolve. Philip has been moved off stage, so I'm curious to see how he's going to come around. Flood has tried to corrupt him, but Philip seems to have like a through line of morality. We're going to see how that plays out. So many of the men in this book, and I don't know, maybe that's who I'm focused on, are just wolves.
Yeah, they're horrible.
So we need to see what happens to them. We also need to see what happens to the men in the next generation, the current boys.
I mean, I counted 4 pairs where there's an older man pursuing a girl, but there are some redeeming men as well. Like, I think Frank Mallet is one of them, and Dobbin, and maybe Stern. We don't really quite know about him yet, but he seems to be more appropriately paternal towards Dorothy.
Right, and the name seems like a misdirection. Right, it's literally a misdirection. She thinks it means stern.
And it really means star in German, So I guess our expectation for the last third of the book is like to see how these characters' stories all play out, and whether there's going to be some cohesion or whether...
Right, and is Olive the storyteller going to sort of survive, or what's going to happen to her? I mean, this is sort of a weird question to ask of a story written by a woman.
Yeah, I don't know. All right, well, we'll be back to talk about the children's book when we finish it. So if you're reading along, please join in the conversation. Drop some comments in the section below, because we would love to hear from you too.